Andrew?
Okay, great. So I wanted to start off actually with this quick poll to see how many of you have had time to look at the broader impacts brainstorming activity before joining today. So yeah, I'll give you a minute to fill that out when I start sharing my screen here. Okay. Okay. Great, thanks. So it looks like most people have not, which is totally fine because one of the things we had planned today is to kind of do an abbreviated version of that for people who haven't had a chance. If you had a chance, that's great too. And hopefully there'll be a chance for you to share some of your ideas as we get into it. So thanks for doing that poll. And I'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, so as Matthew said, today we're going to be talking about broader impacts for the GRFP. And to just briefly kind of introduce why I'm here and who our team is. So I'm from the STEM Ambassador Program, which is based here at the University of Utah in the School of Biology. And currently we are in Dr. Nalini Nadkarni's lab, who is an emeritus professor of biology and a forest ecologist. And starting in the fall, we are going to be based out of Dr. Sarah Yo's lab, our new director, who is in the Department of Communications here. And she is a science communication researcher who specifically studies the humor, effective humor in science communication. And then, yeah, so I am Andrew George. I actually had the NSF-GRFP when I was a graduate student, I guess 7 years ago now at the University of Chicago. And then an NSF postdoc after that. And Helen Webb is on the call with us today too. She is our new program coordinator and just started last week. So the objectives for today are to understand the requirements of broader impacts for the NSF-GRFP specifically, and to characterize activities that boost competitiveness in these proposals. And then we also want to be able to identify appropriate public groups that you may want to work with and write into your proposal. And I'll discuss how and when you can contact these community groups. And lastly, we want to identify sources of further guidance. So I'll kind of reiterate throughout this, but there's a lot of opportunities for you to get involved with things that are on campus here already. You don't need to kind of reinvent the wheel with your broader impacts, and it can be really effective in showing the reviewers that there's a lot of practicality behind your ideas if you do link into other existing programs here on campus already. So I'm sure you've gone over generally what these different merit review criteria are in the other sections of this workshop series, but just a quick recap, the intellectual merit is the part that encompasses the potential to advance knowledge. So this is kind of the research aspect of your proposals. And then the broader impacts encompasses the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievements of specific desired societal outcomes. And there's a bunch of different ways that we can do that. But first, I wanted to just talk about why it's important. So I think especially for larger NSF grants, broader impacts is often something that gets thought of last, and probably even for the GRFP, right? You're thinking about, what's my research, and you want to get the fellowship because you want to fund the research that you want to do so that you're not restricted to following the grants that are already existing in your lab or department, right? It gives you a lot of freedom. But it also gives you a lot of freedom to conduct different broader impacts activities in your community. And the reason that broader impacts are really important is because the funding rate for any NSF proposal is fairly low, right? A lot of people apply, it's highly competitive, and there's going to be a ton of people who have really great research ideas, I'm sure including all of you. And really one of the things that can make you stand out is what you write in for your broader impacts, especially because so many people leave this to the last minute. And space is limited, so certainly in the GRFP, there's going to be many people who write 1 or 2 sentences in their little section about broader impacts about what they want to do. But it is considered at a pretty high level when they're deciding who to fund for these things. So if you can think of some really kind of eye-catching, engaging broader impact to write about that links in with the rest of your story through your kind of personal narrative and research topics, that can be something that really boosts you into getting funded. So these are the list of 9 different kind of categories of broader impacts possibilities from the National Science Foundation. They also kind of reiterate on their website that this is just a list of suggestions. So it's not an all-inclusive list, and you can certainly think outside the box. So I'll just kind of read through it quickly to get us all kind of up to speed on what the NSF considers to be BI possibilities and priorities. So the first one, which is being pretty stressed, especially right now, is full participation of women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented minorities in STEM. So that could be you yourself for this fellowship, or you could be writing in that you want to work with a community group that is advocating for the representation of these groups. Then improve STEM education and educator development at any level. So this could include working with people here at the U, so you could be involved in undergraduate education or any kind of K through 12 education, or it could even be educating the public, adults in, in non-formal setting. Increased public scientific literacy and public engagement. Improved well-being of individuals in society, which is very general, and all of these categories kind of fall into that one as well. Development of diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce. Increased partnership between academia and industry. I think this one is especially appealing, we found, for a lot of people in the engineering departments here at the U. Improved national security, increased economic competitiveness of the United States, and enhanced infrastructure for research and education. And so quickly, I'm just going to go over some general guidelines that we found to be effective for kind of excellent BIs on really good reviews from the NSF. So if appropriate, show a direct relationship between your intellectual merit and broader impacts throughout the entire proposal. So you don't necessarily have to have broader impacts that tie in perfectly to the subject of your intellectual merit, but if they happen to, it's really effective to kind of weave it together throughout the whole proposal. Then tie into existing NSF big goals and investments. So the National Science Foundation has this list of NSF's 10 big ideas, which is linked here. And as Matthew said, I'll share these slides so that you can click on that and see what these 10 big ideas are, and broadening participation. And these are kind of the big sections of broader impacts that NSF right now is really focusing on. And it's kind of one of their goals to keep funding these things at higher rates. So unique broader impacts activities are also exciting. So as I mentioned in the slide, kind of showing the difference between two researchers with different broader impacts ideas, it can really make a big difference to have your broader impacts stick out and be something new and exciting. So describe available resources and collaborations that demonstrate how your new ideas are feasible. So you don't want to come up with some massive big idea just because you think, oh, this is going to get funded. They also really take into consideration the likelihood that you'll actually follow through with the broader impacts. So look for ways to maximize societal impacts, but as I was kind of just mentioning, recognize that small is good, because the NSF is going to be skeptical if you come into it saying that you're going to create this whole big program and sustain it long-term, knowing that, right, you're a graduate student, maybe you've already begun your graduate program and you'll only be here for 5 or 6 more years. Play to your strengths, so build on existing personal activities. And I think that the GRFP is a really good place to do this, specifically because you have the whole section about your relevant background, kind of your goals and future ideas. So you can really link in why your broader impacts activities are important to you and really show the connection a lot more deeply than you're often able to in a more senior NSF proposal. Know your audience and show that you know it. So this is something I'm going to talk about a lot today. So provide specific details about the broader impacts activities that you want to be carrying out. So list organizations by name, and if you can, give numbers of how many people you think that you'll be impacting, and how many events you're going to have. Since this is a 5-year fellowship, you really do have a lot of room here to say that you're going to develop some relationship with an organization here in Salt Lake and follow through throughout the years of your fellowship. And there's lots of room in the GRFP application to do this, because you have a really long section where you can write about kind of your personal background as well as the research. And you can link it into both of those sections. And lastly, as I'll kind of reiterate throughout the whole talk, innovative ideas are really compelling. So there will be a lot of people who write into their grants that they're going to engage with, like K through 12 children, for instance. And that's totally fine if that's something that you want to do. But if you are going to engage with K through 12 children, it's important that you come up with some idea that's really different and going to stand out from hundreds of other people who also have a K through 12 program idea. Okay, so you also want to plan to evaluate your broader impacts ideas. So you want to make sure that your objectives for evaluation are clear, and you can work with professional external evaluators. So this is kind of general advice that we give for our larger NSF broader impacts workshops. The GRFP is a little bit different because you don't really receive a chunk of money that goes towards like budget line items as you would for a larger NSF grant. But this means that it can be really key to partner with existing programs. So there are a lot of programs on campus that will be able to provide evaluation of your broader impacts for free because they're funded by their own grants and means. So you can link in how you're going to want your broader impacts activities to connect with program evaluations that already exist on campus. And one of those programs is the Utah Education Policy Center, which does a lot of research on education. And we partner with them a lot here at the STEM Ambassador Program, and other programs across campus do as well. And this is important. I think this is something that people don't think a lot about, and you don't have to spend a lot of time writing about it in your actual proposal, but it would make a big difference to mention that you do plan on evaluating the success of your broader impacts, right? So say you are going to a K through 12 classroom, you probably want to know if those kids found your event engaging, especially if you are proposing that you're going to keep on coming back to the classroom throughout your GRFP fellowship. So shifting gears here a little bit, I just want to give you a little bit of background about the STEM Ambassador Program, what we do, and kind of opportunities for involvement with our group here on campus. So we ourselves are an NSF-funded program since 2016, about $2.4 million. And the program is scientist-focused and scientist-led. So we train researchers, STEM researchers, how to develop and then actually carry out and evaluate public engagement with science programs for audiences of your choice. And so far, we've trained over 170 scientists around the country and 96 here at the University of Utah. And how this works is we put together these semester-long cohort-based trainings. So there's typically about 15 to 25 scientists in the cohort, and they come from all across campus. So it also provides you with an opportunity for networking here at the U, and it's made up of academics at any level from undergraduates all the way up to senior faculty members. And our focus here is on public engagement with science, which, as you'll note from that list of different examples of broader impacts, is only kind of one of the categories. I think it's probably the largest one, but it doesn't necessarily link into things such as creating connections between academia and industry or national defense, right? It's more about kind of providing science education opportunities for people locally here in the public. And the way that we kind of stress creating these public engagement connections is through this concept of impact identity, where we really think through the research topic and the persona of the scientist, because we find that this leads to highly impactful public engagement events, right? So if you have something that's deeply in common with the community group that you want to work with, then the community group is going to be a lot more receptive to the ideas that you're bringing to the table. And you're also much more likely to kind of learn something from the community group. And this links really well with the GRFP proposal format, because you do have this whole 3-page section where you're writing about your personal background, your goals and experiences. So it really allows you to kind of create this picture or story of why the public engagement or broader impacts ideas that you're going to propose really link to you as a person. And this is something that the NSF is going to find really compelling, because the NSF is really funding you as a person with this fellowship, not the research. This can also lead to longer term broader impacts, which is also nice for the GRFP since it's a 5-year proposal. And it fosters support and a sense of community within academia. So one of the major goals of the STEM Ambassador Program is really just to kind of show people that, you know, scientists are people and we're trustworthy and that we're from a diverse group of backgrounds, which is something, of course, that in the United States is not, I guess, necessarily taken for granted anymore. And lastly, it does include evaluation. So we're still going to have 2 more cohorts of STEM Ambassador here that are funded off our current NSF grant, and we're applying for an extension of that grant. So if you want to join the STEM Ambassador Program as part of your activities, that will include free evaluation to you, which would give you feedback on the success of your public engagement ideas. And so a little background of who we've trained here at the University of Utah. So it's largely, I hope, the same group that's interested in applying for the GRFP. So about 50% of the people that we've trained have been PhD students here at the U. We also have a couple master's students, and this last cohort in the spring was the first one where we allowed any undergraduate students, and we had 2 out of 15 students in that group were undergraduates. So there's opportunities to get involved no matter what level you are at right now, or to write it into your proposals as something that you plan to do in the future if you were to receive this. And in terms of departments that we've worked with, we've actually worked with 25 different departments at the U, and I've kind of condensed that down to 12 different groups here. So a lot of biology, a lot of chemistry, and engineering are kind of the biggest groups we've worked with. And from looking at the enrollment for this session, I think that there's a pretty big representation of people from those groups here today as well. And the way that the STEM Ambassador program works is that we kind of work through these 5 modules in order to go all the way from coming up with an idea for a group that you want to connect with, the whole way through reflection and evaluation of how that program went. So in this first module of Connect, we think about different aspects of the researchers as a person and in terms of their academic structure and what they're researching. And we then look for different community groups that have overlapping interests and values. Once we identify these groups, we have this immersion process where we learn how to contact the groups, many of which will not be used to being contacted by a researcher, because we also kind of stress connecting with groups who are scientifically underserved. So this could be rural populations that just don't have as much access to getting to public education with science centers, such as like the Natural History Museum here on campus. Or it could even just be groups that don't necessarily seek out science education with their free time. So the immersion process is really important. It's something that I would stress doing even when you're writing a proposal. Before you write the proposal, to actually reach out, meet with people in that different community group and think about what kind of goals you have overlapping so you can design an event that's really effective at engaging with those groups. And the next step is to design. So once you've immersed with the group, we really stress this kind of collaborative design aspect. So you'll want to keep on working with a representative of the group that you'd like to engage with and show them your kind of design plans for the event that you're coming up with throughout the process. And they can give you feedback on if they think it's going to be of interest or kind of like push forward the values and goals of the community group. Then we have a whole training session on different strategies for how you can engage with groups, less relevant for the proposal stage, but I think really effective at increasing kind of science communication literacy of a lot of the STEM ambassadors. And then the reflection process involves this whole team of external evaluators who work with us and send out surveys to the ambassadors to see what they learned and also to the community groups to see if they found the events effective. And the reflection part is fairly unique to the STEM Ambassador program. And I think it's really appealing to funding agencies like the National Science Foundation, because then in your annual report, if you were to receive this grant, you can actually go in and write data back to the National Science Foundation showing how effective your broader impacts were. So now I have just a couple examples of what this looks like. So in this first example, we have a wildlife ecologist who studies these large ungulates, and he chose to work with a hunting group in a rural county here in Utah. And the idea behind this was that he would go out to the hunting group's main venue, and they already had these kind of like hunting safety classes, and he could just integrate a lecture about forest ecology into that workshop series that they already had. And he actually, in the end, was able to learn a lot from these hunters and actually establish these kind of longer term connections between them, because of course hunters spend a lot of time just sitting out in the woods waiting for animals to walk by, and they have their own kind of like data just from their own experiences that they can share back with the biologists. And they were also really interested to learn from this biologist about the different migratory patterns of different ungulates. So a couple other examples in this last cohort here in the spring, Cecile Avery studies human genetics and worked with the Utah Arts Alliance doing an art walk down in downtown Salt Lake City. So she worked with people who were definitely not expecting to be walking into kind of like a scientific engagement booth. And she had this whole art and science kind of collage project where she would help them understand genetic variation essentially in a population as they interact with this art project. So a physicist, Ryan McLaughlin, worked with a after-school program for refugee youth in Salt Lake City, kind of giving demonstrations about physics and trying to encourage these students to pursue careers in STEM. Similarly, Hannah Clements worked with an after-school program where she kind of had these really interactive modeling projects for students to learn about chemistry. And then two computer scientists, Annabelle and Deryak Baba, worked with a group called SheTech on their kind of career explorer day, just demonstrating to a bunch of young girls in science what kind of career opportunities there are for women in science, specifically computer science. And a lot of the ambassadors that we've worked with in the past choose to work with existing programs. I think this is a really good option for graduate students, especially at this proposal stage, to kind of show feasibility of the projects that you may be proposing to the National Science Foundation. And some of these programs that we have here on campus are this program called Inspire, which is linked now with the Utah Prison Education Project. So it's a set of programs that are already in place where these the programs on campus here are recruiting scientists essentially to come in to prisons and educate these different prison populations in whatever STEM field that you're working on. These things have really amazing reviews, both from the scientists and from the inmates at these facilities, because it gives them something totally different than what they're used to on their day-to-day. A lot of the ambassadors that we've had that go and work with them try and think about kind of career-oriented skills that you can learn from science, such as maybe like xeriscaping or different agricultural practices. And then the STEM Community Alliance program is kind of a variation of this that's specifically for youth in custody, which also has its own associated conservation program, which is recently getting up and running. And they're looking for a lot of scientists to work with them as well. And like I said, I'll share this PowerPoint and there's links to all these programs on the slides. And then, yeah, lastly, I guess some different collaborations that our ambassadors have worked with in the past. So Travis Morrison worked with the STEM Community Alliance program, the Youth in Custody Education program, and he also partnered with the Utah Museum of Fine Arts here on campus to work with the students on kind of art and science about different environmental engineering, like kind of thought processes. And then we had a geologist, Olivia Miller, who does a lot of field work in Greenland. And she worked with a center here on campus in translation so that she could put together this big pamphlet about what the research team's doing in these remote populations and then actually distribute it in East Greenlandic and Danish to the different populations that she works with. So some kind of key takeaways of different broader impacts activities are to be innovative. So come up with something that you think sounds really unique, but is also very specific and realistic. Align with your personal narrative. So why do these broader impacts matter to you? I think the GRFP is a really good example of how you can spend a lot of time weaving this into your story of how did you get to where you are today, right? Why are you interested in the research that you're pursuing? And how does it relate back to your background? So you can think about different community groups that you could connect with to kind of further those goals for yourself, just as a person, not necessarily as an academic. And then link it to your proposed activities, to your past experiences, research, and future goals. And you also want your BI activities to be impactful. So you want to support the goals, interests, and needs of the community group. So this comes back to kind of that immersion process. So in order to really do this, you have to be really proactive, which all of you are doing by being in this meeting today. And you really want to think about how the activities that you're presenting will actually impact the community groups that you hope to work with. You don't have to do it by yourself. I think this is also key when you're proposing something as a graduate student, because you're going to be busy with your research. So you don't want to propose some huge project that's going to make the NSF think that it's impractical. So you can collaborate with existing programs, institutions, and departments. There's a lot of different options here on campus, all of which I've kind of already mentioned, except the Natural History Museum, also here on campus, which could be of interest to a bunch of different STEM fields. And then a lot of what we do as a STEM ambassador program is kind of linking researchers with networks of community groups, such as senior centers, 4-H clubs. The National Ability Center up in Park City has been a really popular group to work with, and they're always excited to work with scientists. Local communities at your field research stations, I think, is something that can be really appealing if you do work, even if it's not outside of the country, but just in a different location other than Salt Lake, to actually engage with the community members where you're conducting your research. If you work with any human research participants in your studies, you can engage with them kind of after the fact and tell them more about your research topic in general. We've had a lot of people work with the farmers market patrons, just because it's a great opportunity to work with an existing program where you can kind of put together a public education booth, and you'll be engaging with a bunch of people who are not necessarily seeking out science. So you're kind of expanding the reach of science communication in that aspect. A bunch of different after-school programs here in the Salt Lake Valley, and I'd be happy to talk to any of you in detail about which programs might work best for your ideas, as well as clubs, either on campus or off, and nonprofit groups. So now I want to kind of talk about how all of these ambassadors came up with these ideas. So this comes back to our first module in the STEM app program, the Connect module. So thinking about which aspects of yourself as a researcher and as a person lend to connections with different public groups. And how we do this is by going through that kind of interview process in the document that I polled everyone on at the beginning of this. So it looked like a couple of you have completed it already. Most of you haven't had a chance, and that's okay. And essentially what that is, it's a list of questions that kind of gets you brainstorming about what is important to you as a researcher. Why are you conducting the research? Why do you find it interesting? And also what's important to you just as a person, which can help you connect to different groups that you might not have thought about if you're only thinking of yourself in this kind of like binary, I'm a researcher kind of way. So how we do this is we kind of generate keywords going through that list of interview questions, which I think Helen has put in the chat for everyone. So yeah, if you can open those up, you can see that list of questions that we use. And then once we've gone through these kind of keywords, we look for connections across the research and personal side to come up with focal groups or different community groups that we want to work with. And what is the connection that we're anticipating between these groups? Keeping in mind that we want to actually contact the group and make sure that what we think we might have in common, we actually do. So I have a little example of how this worked for myself. So kind of on the research side of things, before starting at the University of Utah, I was working at the Field Museum in Chicago as a conservation biologist. So I was working on understanding how different fish populations in Yaguas National Park in Peru were affected by the establishment of this park. And to do that, I used a lot of specimens that had been collected over the years at the Field Museum. And I was studying different aspects of their fin and body shape or morphology to kind of understand fish that look a certain way, live in certain environments, and how the biomechanics or the physics of their body motions was kind of behind that. We also started a different program while I was there looking at environmental DNA, where you can kind of take a water sample from anywhere and then sequence all the little particles in it and get some idea of the community structure. And as I mentioned, I was studying biomechanics, so I did a lot of high-speed video work, filming fish swimming to understand how fish with different shaped bodies and fins use them in a different way for locomotion. And I did field work in French Polynesia to kind of see how my results in the lab compared to natural populations with different water flow. Yeah, and then on the personal side of things, I think I like a lot of the standard Utah things. So camping, hiking, running, biking, climbing, and I'm also really interested in and passionate about public education, which is why I wanted to work at the Field Museum as a postdoc and my current position here. And lastly, something that definitely connects to my research is that I enjoy fishing recreationally. I'm not very good at it, and I'm interested in learning how to be better. So then this was kind of what my brainstorming board would look like after going through that thought process. And the next step in this process is to look for connections between research and personal keywords to come up with creative community groups that might not necessarily be interested in seeking out science education on their own. So one that I'm actually working on right now is connecting with fly fishing groups around the Salt Lake Valley, and thinking about the connection here being that we're both interested in fishes, of course. Water conservation is a big issue, of course, in Utah in general and in the Salt Lake Valley. So that's something that we're going to have in common, because if we lose the water, we lose this kind of recreational sport. And I think I can link in this kind of interesting topic of environmental DNA, or just taking water samples to kind of see what's in this river. This is something that I think is interesting to people in general, but also people who are specifically interested in understanding, the community structure of aquatic invertebrates that they're going to use to pick out flies to fish for certain species of fish. A second example could be maybe a little more off the wall in terms of direct connections, but I could work with some sort of teen technology center because they may have overlapping interests in technology, coding, data analysis, and just general career exposure. And lastly, I could link my interests in morphology and biomechanics with my interest in cycling to work with a group like a cycling club to talk about the biomechanics, shape analysis, and performance of different bike shapes and designs. So what we're going to do now, well, first, I want to ask if anyone just has questions for me in general, but then we're going to go through a little activity where you can think through some of these questions and start brainstorming, which we're going to let you do just individually with these slides that I believe Helen has also dropped into the chat, this BI brainstorming board, which is essentially a blank version of those PowerPoint slides that I was just sharing for my own experience. And then it's kind of like a think, pair, share activity. We're going to send you into breakout groups so that you can brainstorm from the keywords that you come up with, different community groups that you might want to work with. And one aspect I think that's interesting about STEM app and that we're going to try and do here is that oftentimes we come up with more creative ideas when we're describing our research to people who are not in our very specific research field. So hopefully we have a good representation of different academic departments here today that can help out with that. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second here and see if anyone has questions before we do any of that. And feel free to put them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask too.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if there's a group that I've already been involved with, already done stuff with before, do you think it would be advantageous to write about a project with that same group, or would it be better to try and reach out and do something completely different?
Yeah, I think both options would be fine. I think there's a lot of value, especially in something like the GRFP, to propose working with a group that you've already worked with, maybe in a different way, to show that you're going to use the funding and the flexibility that it provides you to do something that you're not already doing, but you're going to also be, kind of furthering the collaborative partnership that you already have with that community group. So yes, I think that would be great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Do you have a group in mind?
Yeah, the Access Scholars group. It's a group, like a scholarship kind of program that for women in science, kind of giving them scholarship and funding and placing them in a research lab.
Oh, great. Yeah.
It's one that I was actually in as a freshman, and then I've worked with them ever since.
Okay, yeah, that sounds perfect.
Cool.
Any other questions? So if not, I think the best way to do this is if everyone can download that brainstorming board PowerPoint slide and then look at the questions in the Word document. And then go ahead and kind of fill out the keywords. And we're just going to take 5 minutes to do that independently. And we'll stay in this main group here in case questions do arise and anyone wants to ask me. And then after 5 minutes, we'll break off into breakout rooms so that you can kind of discuss different options with your group. And then we'll come back as a big group and we can discuss any examples that people want to talk about. I think I'll give just a couple more minutes. I know this is like a very abbreviated way of doing this, but maybe just wrap up by just filling in generally the different sections. The personal section with kind of hobbies or personal identity factors that are important to you, and the research section with just keywords from your research topics. And if you're done, maybe you can use the little raise hand action so I can see where everyone's at. Oh, and to be clear, you don't have to at this point go through and fill out the focal group and connection section. That's kind of what we'll do in the breakout rooms. So right now, just getting the keywords ready. Okay, so I think, Helen, if you would maybe do breakout groups of just groups of 2, since there's not too many people on the call. If anyone has questions before we move off into those rooms, let me know. But the idea here is that you can discuss with your partner in the breakout room different ideas for community focal groups and what the connection is between your different sticky note ideas on your PowerPoint slide. So you can share your screen. I think that's enabled for everyone when it's your turn to kind of be the brainstorming person. And we'll stick in those groups. I think let's do 10 minutes total. So you'll have 5 minutes each to think about different groups.
Should I start those now?
Yeah, I think so. There's no questions. And I'm wondering if it invited us to join the rooms as well.
Is it asking you guys to?
It is. Oh, it's not for you, Matthew. Okay. It is for me, which is fine. I can do that. If
I
it's
put
not,
you in a room by yourself, so you don't have to join it. It's you're not with them. Yeah.
perfect. Okay, and then Helen, I'm thinking I might just hop around between the breakout rooms to see if people have questions too.
Sure.
But we can close them at like 10:52 maybe.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Hey, Matthew.
Hi.
I have a quick question for you.
Certainly.
I'm doing some statistics for our office based on like, it's like an annual report and stuff. Is there any way to know how?
I'll be back. I'm not sure. There's a couple less people than when we went into the room. So we wait another 20 seconds or so and see if they get bumped back here. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen again, and I just have a couple kind of key takeaway follow-up things to discuss. Okay. I guess first, does anyone have a broader impact plan or idea that they'd like to share with the group or ask a question about? Or does anyone just have questions in general about this brainstorming process? And if so, you can just unmute and start talking. It's hard for me to see everyone's little screens now. And if not, that's okay as well. We can move on here. Okay. So in terms of how this all relates to your actual proposal, so for writing this into your GRFP application, the things that you really want to do before you write and submit your grant proposal are to identify that focal group, whether it's a community group or maybe you're in engineering and you really want to work with a different industry partner or think about how your work relates to defense or economics. You still would probably have some sort of partner organization that you're working with. So you'd want to identify that group, name them by name, and be really specific about which group you're going to work with, where that group is, and what you're going to do with them. You want to research that focal group so that you have that information to include in your grant. And ideally, you would have time, which you all do if you're starting now, to actually contact someone in that group. And then you could start to put together a plan of what you would actually do if you're funded. And this would be something that's really compelling them to the NSF, because you can even write in your proposal that you've started discussions with, name the person by name at the institution, and you have this idea to pursue this different, whether it's a public education with science event or different broader impact activity. Okay, and then in your proposal, you want to include these really specific information, details on the engagement event and format, which is relevant now because a lot of people do engage virtually. This also kind of opens up, I think, a broader set of possibilities for a lot of scientists, because now we have so much experience doing what we're doing right now and kind of like working, meeting new people, discussing topics in a virtual format. So maybe now you can pick that you're going to work with a group that's not right here in Salt Lake because it makes the most sense for you. And you can discuss why that's practical because you'll do it over Zoom or something. And then list any kind of collaborations that you may have with the events or activities that you're coming up with. So this is kind of separate, I guess, from the focal group that you want to work with. Maybe you're also going to partner with someone in the education department or in communications. Maybe you want to partner with one of the programs here on campus. If you want to work with, an incarcerated population, then there's a bunch of different groups that you could work with. that are going to show that it's feasible for you to kind of gain access to these facilities and link into pre-existing workshop education training programs that they already have going on. And importantly, we can talk about where broader impacts are going to go in your proposal. So as I've discussed, I think broader impacts fits really well with your personal relevant background and future goal statement. This is also kind of the longer statement that you have room for in the NSF-GRFP proposal. So you have 3 pages here. And it gives you a lot of room to write about what's important to you as a person, right? Why are you pursuing the research you're pursuing? Where do you hope to take it? And this can set you up really well for writing about your broader impacts and why those broader impacts are important and feasible to you. Importantly, in this section, you have to have a subsection that is specifically labeled as your broader impacts section. And that's where you're going to describe the details of the broader impacts, but it's okay to refer to your broader impacts in your intellectual merit section in this as well, so that you can kind of weave together that story throughout the whole document. Similarly, in the graduate research plan statement, so this is kind of more the intellectual merit heavy part of your proposal where you're writing what research you're going to be doing. Here, you're also required to talk about broader impacts in the statement under a separate heading. So here's where you really want to link into kind of the left-hand side of that brainstorming pages that we were just working on. So how does your broader impact activity relate to your research? Or even if it's just you as a researcher, if the topic's not, exactly overlapping, I'm sure that there's some overlap with science in it, right? And so you want to link that there. And I think it's a good idea and can be impactful to, in that section, refer back to your personal relevant background and future goal statement where you can have more detailed information, right? So you can be referencing each of the documents and each of the sections throughout the whole proposal to kind of explicitly show the reviewers how all of this is connected. Okay, so if appropriate, connect to your broader impacts to the intellectual merit throughout, kind of just reiterating the section above. And importantly, your reference letter writers are told to and required to talk about your broader impacts. That's part of what is going to be reviewed in your reference letters is their comments on your broader impacts. So definitely talk to your reference letter writers about what your broader impacts ideas are. Oftentimes it can be tempting to just tell them about this exciting research project that you've thought up and that you've written about. But I really recommend sharing the details of what you want to do for your broader impacts as well, because that is something that's going to be seen by the reviewers. And if you don't talk to the reference letter writers about it, they won't be able to provide details. So the more information you can give them, the better, because that gives them more information to advocate for you. And tell them why it's important to you as well, not just what you're going to do, but why you're going to do it. And lastly, if/when you receive the GRFP, you can report your broader impacts activities in your annual, final, and project outcome reports, which you would be submitting every year. And it's kind of showing the NSF that you're taking broader impacts seriously and that you're actually doing it and you know how well you're performing. And this is important for kind of securing future funding through the National Science Foundation as well. Okay, so lastly, some kind of resources that we can continue helping you with. So the STEM Ambassador Program, as I mentioned, leads these semester-long cohort-based trainings. We have 2 more that are going to be funded through the National Science Foundation. So they're totally free for anyone who's a researcher, student, faculty member at the U. So our fall applications are going to be coming soon in July for fall 2022. And it would be great if you're interested to apply, and then we can help you kind of even more in depth think through these broader impacts ideas. It would also be appropriate to write in your proposal that you hope to join the STEM Ambassador Program and kind of improve your science communication skills, and then relate that to whichever community group or public group that you're proposing to work with. And we also provide at the STEM Ambassador Program broader impacts consultations to individual PIs or researchers, which is you in this case. So if you're interested in talking to us in more detail about the specifics of your own broader impacts, we have a sign-up page through the Research Education Department in the VPR's office here at the U. That's also totally free. We can talk through your ideas in person over Zoom. We're also happy to read through any written documents that you have for your proposal and kind of help you edit it as it comes together. So yeah, definitely feel free to contact us through there, or we can put our emails in the chat and Matthew can send them out as well with the PowerPoint after this. But yeah, definitely feel free to contact us if you have any more questions or just want to talk through your broader impacts ideas. So a couple other resources, which will just be useful when you get the PowerPoint yourself. There's links here for different organizations that are also dedicated to broader impacts, such as the National Science Foundation funded Center for Advancing Research Impacts in Science, or ARIS, which is based in the Midwest, but they help researchers across the country. Our program, the STEM Ambassador Program, and then the STEM Community Alliance Program is that Youth in Custody program. And they have hundreds of events where scientists go into these youth in custody facilities every year. They get really great reviews from the National Science Foundation and other public funding agencies because it's incredibly impactful. The students really love it. It kind of mixes up their day, and they always say they learned something interesting, and the scientists like it too. So that's another thing that you could think about writing into your proposal as a potential broader impact. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. And if anyone has questions for me, feel free to just kind of unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. And if we don't have any questions, that is the end of what I've prepared here. I don't know if Matthew has any kind of final thoughts or info about the next session that he wants to share. But
Thank you so much, Andrew and Helen, for joining us here today. As mentioned, this recording will be online on our website, nsf-grfp.utah.edu. I'll send out a notice to everyone once we get this and last week's video on personal statements uploaded. And we will also be sharing the slides, and I can share with you Andrew's contact information. Next week is our final installment in our summer application preparation series, where Dr. Tony Butterfield from Chemical Engineering Department will be talking about preparing your graduate research plan statement. A lot of what we talked about today, broader impacts, will be a part of that as well. Broader impacts and intellectual merit are to be addressed in both the personal statement and the graduate research plan. So join us next week, but in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to me or as well as the STEM Ambassador Program if you have any questions. And with that, thank you so much for joining us. Have a good day.
thank you, everyone.